Thank you and welcome everyone to this panel discussion for the exhibition Northwest School Now. We will have a reception upstairs afterwards. I hope you'll join us. We have some nips and sips for you to enjoy with the exhibition. And a few of the artists in the show are here with us today also. Before I introduce, and when I say panel discussion, we hope this is interactive. Ellie Lai, who's been our summer intern, will be passing a microphone. Please don't be shy. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question at any time, you're welcome to. And we will have a more formal Q&A towards the end. I'd like to acknowledge before we start, this is recorded and you'll be able to see it and share it online. Typically it takes a week or more just for some minor editing. And also, I'd like to thank the curatorial staff at BIMA, Dasha Moore, who is here today, curatorial associate, who helps me very, very much in planning exhibitions and tracking all the art and all of the agreements and things. But I share the really fun part, which is of all of the art and artists out there that we could have included. She really helps hone that down. I appreciate that. Kim Siegel and also Christy Heath, and Christy's just coming in. Kim is on vacation, and these people will all be at the reception as well. But I just want to say that it does take a village, and that's just the curatorial staff, not even thanking all of the BIMA staff in education, marketing, development, et cetera. So thanks, everybody. Today, I've asked Debbi Lester on my left to join us. If anybody has seen it all over how many years now with Art Access magazine?
32.
32. It's Debbi Lester. And I want to thank her for how much she's covered and promoted and informed this entire region. And also someone reminded me today that she is former mayor of Bainbridge Island. And we also have our esteemed Christopher Snow, the original mayor of Bainbridge Island, Chris?
He's a former.
Former, okay. When Bainbridge was incorporated as a city. Phen Huang from Foster White Gallery. And what I also was very interested, and thank you for working with some of your artists to lend to this show. And but also, you've just seen it all from entirely different perspectives, and your family with the gallery in British Columbia as well. I think you also bring another perspective observing.
Just a little further north on the Salish Sea.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, and again, please feel free to comment or have questions at any time. Debbi has put this together for me. You'll see in a video that we're going to start with that we are covering this 1953 Life magazine article that was fundamental to cementing nationally this concept of the Northwest School, and also really brought attention to sort of, for the first time, attention in the contemporary art world to what was considered the cultural dustbin, the Pacific Northwest within the broader, and keep in mind as we talk this through, that the article comes out in 1953. This is post-World War II, but pre-Seattle World's Fair. And it was really a different time than we're in today. And today, this show talks about 71 years later. So we're going to watch a short video, some of you may already have seen it, that BIMA produced about this exhibition. This region has so many rich art legacies. There is no consensus in the art field today as to whether the Northwest School ever existed or still persists. And legacy stories are so important. And that's why I wanted to pursue this and mine it further and see, does this really persist? Are there artists out there that would respond in a very positive way being identified with it? The idea of the Northwest School is foundational. It starts in the 1930s and 40s with artists, primarily painters, but artists working in other media as well. They begin to discuss these similarities of inspiration, Pacific Rim histories and cultures, artistic legacies. Nature, of course, plays a really big role. And when I think about what I've learned or even projected on Northwest School art over the decades, I think of personal journey. There's such a variety of art media in this show. The original four, the big four, were painters primarily. And what I wanted to do was show how art has really exploded in all directions. And at the time, they would deny that it's really the school that they formed or even school of thought. It was more a label that gets attached to them. And it seems like when the Big Four were interviewed for this 1953 article, they had this magical, mystical experience, possibly because of how they were able to look out and see wonder. So the Northwest School isn't just something that we're interested in now and covering, but it's really been a part of my, whole evolution as an arts administrator in the region. And Barbara Straker James had this beautiful quote. This isn't the exact quote, but Northwest art is like a river. It draws from its source, continues to draw from its source, but over time, as things flow, time and water and rivers, it continues to go in different directions. So this quote ends up being the specific inspiration for this exhibition now. We had to really think about exactly what we would include and why. If we start with nature and reverence for it, today, 71 years later, so many artists are focused on concern for nature. Take David Eisenhower, for example. He is presenting a brand new series that's being shown for the first time with this show. It represents a concern for plant life in the sea. Seaweed, kelp, etc. is so fundamental to the health of the Puget Sound region. With this series, you see that he's taken objects that represent the impact of humanity on nature. Social justice is another huge flow. In fact, it could almost be a fork if you look at the river of stemming from not just the Northwest School, but what influences artists in general today. Barbara Earl Thomas has this series of paintings related to the phenomenon of blackbirds just all of a sudden falling from the sky by the hundreds. And she's taken the red-winged blackbird, and you see as it comes and it begins to fall down, it turns into black boys, black men that land dead on the sidewalk. It's about urban violence, gun violence, police violence. You see a lot of fiber art. It's really big today. The work of Cameron Ann Mason, in my mind, is just so beautiful. I was at Foster White as they were installing her show recently, and these large-scale fiber pieces were just going up, but I just all of a sudden felt awash with this idea, this show that we were curating. I wanted to include artists that I felt had a more contemporary view. Joe Feddersen, whose work is traveling nationally in a wonderful retrospective, lent this fish trap piece, which is a contemporary version of how you might trap fish in a river. So in this show, we deliberately have drawn from compelling talent. I love this metaphor of Northwest art being a river, and it keeps changing over time, and who knows what new paths it will cut. Where it will go, I don't know. Artists reflect their place in time, and some take us other places maybe we don't know exist yet. I wonder if the tributary or the fork of climate change and social justice will continue to wander off in some big way and reflecting not just the erosion of the flow, but the erosion of our lives and our world. Change in directions isn't a bad thing, but artists today are in some ways being forced more and more into a journalistic role than just an expressive artistic one. Maybe there's some healing processes and it allows parts of this river to flow back into one, and maybe there's some things we don't know about that are pretty exciting and fun, and we're gonna wander off in new directions. That's our intro. We'll go back to, once the video ends, we'll go back to PowerPoint. Thanks, Christy. Other duties is assigned. Here we are. Okay. All right. So, Jenna, you want to? We had planned a few introductory questions, and now we're kind of laughing at ourselves about those.
Well, we were going to open with the question of does this sensibility of the Northwest School even exist? And does it still exist today, or could it possibly exist more today than it did even when the term was originally coined? But through the video and also some slides that people here have put together, it kind of becomes a moot point because it's obviously so rich and so full.
I think we're convinced. What do you think?
When, that's my cell phone. When Greg cornered me and asked me to participate, I was like, why? Why me? I don't understand. I just make the magazine. But he was like, yes, you've seen quite a bit. And then I was like, oh my gosh. And I actually went back through every magazine that I've made since 1992 and made a list. And here's that list. And it was 97 artists, not including what's in the exhibition, that I had pulled together in a quick way. So you could see that if you want. But so really, what is here is that this particular place, the Northwest, the richness of the forest and the beautiful landscapes, the water and all of the waterfalls, the fact that we can go out and go to these places, hiking and backpacking and fishing and be a part of it. I saw that with many of the artists, that this place was in them and that their expressions were the essence of this space, of this place. So, I had quite a few, and thank goodness I had narrowed it down to just 17 or 18. And then I got an email from Greg that said, send in 2 or 4 slides. I was like, oh, man. So we whittled down more. We kicked out another third. But, and again, I would like to thank Greg for the amazing show upstairs. And I see artists here that are in the show upstairs. It's an incredible show. And I appreciate his courage and curiosity to say, who else might be in this show? And I think this show begins that conversation. So thank you.
So you all, in a moment, will get to see 11 of her 97. Phen, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It's a gorgeous show, and it has so many marvelous perspectives from across the room where you're viewing 6 or even 10 artists at a time, but they're very much in conversation. And so when you did ask me to join, I too was petrified to come sit up here and speak about it. I'm not from here. What do you mean? Why would you ask me? But I do have a very strong idea now. After contemplating it for a number of weeks, how I feel about your query. Is there a Northwest school? And of course, I think it is because of Zoe Dusan and her forward thinking, her bravery, a single mother of African American descent who comes back to Seattle, and her parents start the first chapter of the NAACP. Like, she's a force. How exciting. But she's the one that got a friend of hers to write that article for the Life magazine and put Seattle on the map, giving everybody permission to be proud of where they come from, proud of the work that comes from here, willing to put their dollars into enforcing a vocabulary that is Pacific Northwest and Seattle centric, so the center of our little world. But of course, it's more than that. It's Skagit Valley, and it is the peninsula, and it is further south, and it is a little east. And it isn't just Western art, but it does have Native American leanings, and it is the landscape that we see. But it is also defining who we are. How are we as a people? How do we want the rest of the world to see us as a people? Are we in a global conversation? Being in Life magazine gave us permission to speak as loudly as we wanted to as a people, with causes, with a perspective, with loves and wants. And then also to, in our community, talk about the things that are serious and maybe not working. Yeah, and I think too, then, this lovely metaphor of water starting at the top and being narrow, but branching and coming back together and having its different moments over time is really important, that we allow ourselves to include everything. It's not just about 4 men who were strongly influenced by the 50 years that preceded them, but it is all of us being strongly influenced by the past few hundred years that precedes us, and trying to coalesce all these different veins of our, or little rivulets, together into a stronger message that is inclusive, idealistic, and shares what we all want for betterment. Yeah, so it's really exciting to think of this show, because as you have opened the question here in the museum, you've also allowed it to be open and create the possibility of new rivulets to come together into your conversation. I just hope that you'll just do this, every couple of years or something like that. It'd be really exciting.
Well, with the hundreds of artists who could have been in this show, I'm sure it could become a series. Thank you. Thank you very much. I wanted, so I wanted to just show, Jenna had asked me early on, how did the show come about? I was the former director of the Museum of Northwest Art in La Conner. Barbara Stryker James was a curator there before me. I never knew her personally. She's the wife of Clayton James, and we do have a piece in our collection in the show. I wanted this to be more now. There are only 3 artists in the exhibition that have passed away. And not that, art doesn't still really impact us, but I wanted it to be about artists who were living and working. Mary Randlett is in the exhibition. She would have been 100 years old this year in 2024. And previously, a friend of hers, Carla Wolfsberg from Olympia, called me and asked if I knew that Mary would be 100 and was BIMA going to do anything about it, because we have quite a bit of work of hers in our collection. And I said, I didn't know that, but she definitely will be in this show, because she is one of the very first women and a photographer, which, as the river flows and the media broadens, as time goes by, to be recognized in the Northwest School. Then we also have Philip McCracken, who has been a mentor and a real inspiration to many artists. David Eisenhower, sitting here, has referenced him, and Peregrine O'Gormley, who's in the exhibition. Also, Marcille DeLacy, who's in our collection, but not in this exhibition. Actually, some of the wood she's used was given to her by Philip McCracken. So there's all these connections. And then, of course, I mentioned Clayton James. Barbara Straker James, as I understand, quit her career. You have a household of 2 artists, and someone has to maybe have the job and pay the rent. And but like a lot of women in the day who ended up supporting male artists, she ended up becoming an arts administrator. So wanted to show just a few inspirational slides. Really wanted to cover these maybe forks of the river as we talk about it. Julianne Mann happens to also be a volunteer on the BIMA art installation crew. I find her work to be some of the freshest, most powerful, thoughtful, intelligent work of newer artists, newer to me, who I have been introduced to in the last few years. This piece is made of wasp nests. It's upstairs. So I wanted to include people working in different media, lots of women in this show. Neko Morisawa, you see this piece as you get off the elevator. The book that Dolores Tarzan Ament wrote, Iridescent Light, which is some, real, some consider a form of like the Bible of the Northwest School. It's a book that was published in 2002, and we have a copy upstairs. You can find it online. It's out of print. But when I think of Iridescent Light, and you look at the muddy palettes of the original 4, although they go into mysticism and things, but I wanted the show to explode a little bit more in terms of color, which is another thing. And then Joe Feddersen has 3 pieces in the show. We saw the fish trap in the video. When he started doing the series of glass vessels, I thought the lines were some kind of reference to some of the patterns you see in native weavings, maybe Navajo blankets and things like that. These are urban parking lot grids. In this case, the diagonal parking lines. And I laugh, but I think about, and his work is very serious, beautiful, but he does also have a sense of humor in some of it. But I think about if you were a being on some spaceship coming into our planet and trying to figure out and looking down at our cityscapes, and you're kind of trying to figure out, what are they trying to tell me? How do I decode this? And what are those patterns, and what does it mean? And I think about, these aren't Joe's words, they're mine, but what lasting imprint will we have? It's kind of like what you were referring to, Phen. Where does this go, and what's all happening? What messages do the artists have? So I wanted to dig into that a bit with this show as well. Now, Debbi and Phen responded to, and I didn't mean to make it a PhD process, but you did a great job. And they're going to talk about some of the artists who are not in this show that could have easily been, or if they were to curate, say, the next version in a series, who could be included?
So one of the first persons that came to mind was Thomas Wood in terms of his landscape painting, and I appreciate also his sense of humor. He actually he was studying chemistry and then switched courses and became an artist. And he studied up in the Fairhaven College up in Bellingham. I like this series of pieces that I've gathered because there's also a hint of other artists. The floating, is that a flounder? kind of reminiscent of, say, Jay Steensma's work. And then in the center, that feels a little bit like Susan Benestrom. And then the bouquet of flowers. He used to live, he actually passed away. The bouquet of flowers, thinking about Morris Graves and his many flower paintings. But you could see there's a tiny dinosaur out in the. So he has a sense of humor. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, he has a show opening September 28th up at Whatcom Museum. And another artist, similar, again, when I was just like, what do I feel some of the aesthetics similar are? And John D. Cole, he was actually friends with Thomas Wood. And these images, because I'm often out in the landscapes, they resonated with me. Next slide, please.
Just wanted to note that Cabin at the Lake in your lower right is in our permanent art collection, and it's on display as part of a robotics project in the classroom corridor.
Go back, please, sorry. Mary Randlett took the photograph of John D. Cole, and interesting enough, her mother, Betty Willis, was very much engaged. She actually was literally engaged to Mark Tobey at one point, but Morris Graves talked her out of going forward with the marriage. And that was one of their disputes that they had going, along with the fact that Tobey felt that Graves had stolen his white writing technique. But it was fascinating that Mary Randlett's mother was like, encouraging her to take these photographs of artists. Next slide, please. Hart James, very interesting, passionate work here. She's originally from Kentucky. I'm originally from Kentucky. I didn't know any of this stuff, by the way, until this week when I started really digging into these. All of these artworks, I purely visually selected them. And then it was fascinating as I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta talk about these people, researching about them. And she had stayed at Morris Graves' retreat residency. And it's very fascinating to like all of these threads that end up weaving together. And her works are very physical, a lot of palette knife, and I think she's someone that is, again, giving the essence and the physicality of those Northwest landscapes.
I love this, Debbie, because Hart was in our Spotlight exhibition, the juried show, but also we'll have a solo exhibition of Hart's. I didn't know Hart until she introduced herself to me a few years ago. So, we're either like totally wrong or I mean, we're like really on it, or we're just so totally wrong because the three of us are really vibing on this.
And this, I'm very fascinated by this individual. Barry Johnson, he's currently showing at Winston Wachter Fine Art. Please look up his TED Talk. It's a Seattle TED Talk. You can look it up online. But what's fascinating is that he just decided to take on these personas. Like for a while, he had a persona that he was a tech person. And so he started wearing suits and going out and hanging out with engineers and learning how to do tech stuff. And he created a platform called Inkstain. And then later he decided, I'm going to be a bodybuilder. And then he became a bodybuilder. And so he had all of these interesting personas. And by the way, my persona is fearless, more fearless. So I'm fearless. That's my persona up here right now. Because I'm actually terrified. But anyway, it was fantastic to see that one of his personas, he decided to be Barry Johnson, the artist. And he read a book about that artists get up at 3 a.m. and that they begin painting and studying. He worked diligently, and he was like very frustrated. But finally, I mean, look at this work. These are large-scale works, probably 48 feet, 4 feet, 60 inches, huge. And the thing I loved about this work was actually seeing a man of color climbing in a cedar tree or lying on the beach, or so kind of moving into spaces and enjoying places. And when he decided to be an artist, he decided to be an artist in every medium. He actually also did sculpture and filmmaking and painting. And the sculpture is of, I can't read my writing, Dr. James Washington Jr. I left out the junior by accident. And he is one of those Northwest School as well.
He's featured in Dolores's book, Iridescent Light, and we're working with the foundation, the Dr. James W. Washington Jr. Foundation. Summer, 1 year from now, summer 2025, we'll have his retrospective.
Next slide, please. Ann Morris, beautiful, this is her studio and her 14-acre property. And she's actually donated it to the Western Washington University, I think is what it states there. I thought her work was very, in terms of the myth and spirit of this place, the vessels. A lot of her work now is very fragile, and I think that she has that kind of spirit of place. Next slide, please. Interesting tie, this particular artist, Kim Obank, highly detailed, and these works are like the hawk that's wrapped in the bundle. I also gave a visual of it being installed. When you walk to the gallery, that's the first piece you see. It's like 7 feet tall. What's interesting, again, these ties that you don't know are connected. When I researched about her, found out that she's now the steward for the sculpture Woods and Morris. So she is the person that helps facilitate within Ann Morris's. I didn't know that, and it was fascinating that there was that connection between the two. But I love her sensibility and appreciation of the details. Next slide, please. Beautiful work, Deborah Moore. She actually studied at Pratt and Pilchuck School, and she started doing glass when there were very few women, and especially women of color, working in the glass world. And she to get in, she often would just say, "I will be your gaffer. I will do this." And so she worked her way up and was eventually on Dale Chihuly's team. And this particular work, body of work, she's known pretty much for the orchid pieces. And then in 2018, she did these beautiful trees and for the Tacoma Art Museum show. And that particular series was called Orbario, which means tree forms in Latin. And I was just taken, the reason I wove her in here was, again, thinking about the Morris graves, the beautiful flower paintings, and I look at these and just taken by the detail. And the other thing that was fascinating that she talks about her work and how she's very interested in texture. Her mother later in life became blind, and so she would love to take her mom and to like feel the artwork. And the detail, that winter plum, the red plums, you can see like it feels like there's frost on them.
It's
Okay,
exquisite work.
next slide. Jan Ho. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Hoi, thank you. I only see these in print. I don't typically get to hear the names. I see the names when they come through digitally. Jan, I was fascinated with her work because to me, similar, that kind of hefty Guy Anderson forms and shapes. And what was interesting as I learned more about her, she actually originally started out studying to be a landscape architect and ended up being completely bored out of her mind. And she was like, what am I doing this? And so she decided to take a leap of faith and began doing art. And at one point, somehow she was curating a show up in Port Townsend of Guy Anderson's work. again, how is this possible that I picked this out purely for the visual, and it ends up that there's a tie? And so for 6 months, she lived with Guy Anderson's work as she prepared the brochure, and she said it was being with that work that she decided, she had that epiphany that I'm going to do as he did. I'm going to be passionate for my life and be passionate about doing this work continually. And so she began to work in clay. Next slide, please.
And I'll just add that she then started working in bronze, so she could also have addition work. And now she's working in public sculpture on large-scale pieces as well. And her work is, it's a great choice. She was one of the first sculptors that we accepted a piece into our permanent art collection of. It's a bronze piece. You'll see it rotating frequently.
And by the way, you could see a piece of her work on Bainbridge Island. Interlocking is out in front of the Umpqua Bank on Winslow Way. Ed Kamuta, I've always been interested about this work, and as I read about him, it ends up he was wrestling with becoming a poet, and his neighbor told him he should become a painter, and his neighbor happened to be Guy Anderson. So again, I love, and many of these individuals that this particular person is self-taught, and I love his kind of expression and very, very kind of raw quality to it. Next slide, please. And Greg Lananen, I hope I said that right. And you were correct about his mom having been a curator.
Sarah Clark Landon, and she was at Western Washington University in Bellingham with the gallery there and then the wonderful sculpture park. Anyway, this whole corridor, from Seattle up to Bellingham is really the heart of this whole vibe of the Northwest School.
And so his work, I could see Morris Graves, Mark Tobey, I could see Ed Kamuta, and guess what? As I read about him, it ended up that he and Ed are friends, and were friends. And that what's interesting now with his work, he's actually moving into construction using found wood and creating kind of totem images, as well as painterly using bits of wood and painting on them. I just saw those yesterday. But again, when I first was looking through the magazine and I saw his work, I was like, this has kind of that Northwest sensibility. And next slide. Jeff Gunn, I've always loved Jeff Gunn's work. And what was interesting to me is that Jeff Gunn was originally born in Seattle, and he now lives in Portland. But he came back here in the 80s, and that's when I first got to Seattle. And he said he returned because of the rain. And the other thing that he was haunted by were images he had seen at Francine Setter's gallery, and they were Mark Tobey, Guy Anderson, Kenneth Callahan, and again, there we were, weaving back into this story of how these artists had been inspired by those four. Thank you.
So the next slides are offered by Phen, and I guess we don't have to talk about whether this Northwest School concept or feeling persists at this point anymore, right? I think, is everyone out there convinced, or we have to? So we'll just keep moving forward. Phen.
Well, with the idea that the Northwest School is not a thing exactly, and that at the time of 1953, that the article comes out, and they are all like, "No, not me. We didn't get together." Of course, they did a little bit because they were taking Sumi and Gansai lessons from George Tsurukawa, or they were definitely, reaching out to the other, maybe the 180 degrees on our ring of fire, so out to Japan and other places. It seemed to me that not necessarily everybody has to be born here to express what it is to be here. And so while Akio Takamori was born in Japan, went to school at Alfred in New York, and didn't show up here until Patty Warashina said, okay, take my place at UW because I'm out. He was teaching for 20 years there and definitely has an influence on our future as a Northwest school. But further to that, does refer to all the things that were really important even in 1950 or 1930 or 1940 with the same little group of 4 to 14. And it is an expression of these Asian brush techniques, but on a different medium. So the question of whether or not everybody has to be a painter seems to me, it was obvious with James Washington Jr. and others that sculpture was as important. Found objects were as important. So how many paintings have you seen by either Morris Graves or, I don't know, Gilkey or somebody on a piece of driftwood that they found at the beach, right? Because how else do you express it? You can't even paint it. This is the beauty of being here, that we can sit out in the rain and have lunch, and that we are so influenced by everything around us. So Akio Takamori's work does speak to so many things that are important to us here, the internment. He did make references to being at Menodoka, even though that's not his family history directly. It is our collective family history, and that's why I wanted to bring him in. But you can also see how strongly he is referencing world art and the history of world art in this particular piece. Of course, Velázquez on the right, and then ancient Japanese paintings on the left. Next, please. So Patty Warashina, she's the one that brought him. But she's still important to us now, and she is a mover and a shaker, and she's making sure that ceramics are relevant here. But then she's speaking about politics and what is important to us in the upper left. That it is, the world is topsy-turvy right now, and we're a little bit tumbling and trying to find some gravity. But then with her lighthearted approach, we can be talking about super serious things. Next,
And
please.
also, your first two offerings are two people who are really big in the public art world here as well.
Yes.
And I think that's what's so interesting is seeing how artists transcend the tabletop gallery world into the public art. But it just struck me sitting here that if you go down, especially South Lake Union, you see wonderful examples of both of these artists.
Absolutely. And then go to the Smithsonian and see them too. They represent. Yeah. And that's what we want. We want to be recognized. We want to be at Venice Biennale because we've got something to say. And it might be quieter. It might have muted color, at least originally. It might have no color. We won't say who that is. But, don't know how. But it also is this quiet inner world that we really have been focusing on, and it is so much of our everyday, and it is so much that we rely on our artists to distill what is important. So the poetry of speaking for the rest of us in our gently persistent way.
Okay, ready?
Yes. So Preston Singletary. This piece is part of a recent exhibition at Traver, and he not only made these beautiful glassworks, which of course are from the vocabulary of, well, his Tlingit heritage, but definitely true to most of the Salish as well. But he coupled this work with storytelling from a First Nations storyteller that truly made a beautiful story. And if you go online to Traver Gallery's site, you can read the whole story, and each of the pieces is described. But he's talking about politics. He is talking about a lost people who are now just finding their way, and how important it is as a Tlingit member, I don't know, representative from the Eagle clan who is so familiar with the other more important Tlingit clan from Raven, and what does it mean to be from Raven, and what is Raven doing for his people now? Raven is protecting the children here. It's a beautiful story. But he, too, is using a vocabulary that is inherent to not only his culture, but possibly even genetically. And then tying into what is our everyday, the questions that we have about how we're going to protect one another, protect our future, and maybe even protect our heritage. It's really very moving and powerful. And I think it is much like being an introvert on a little island, make your little drawings, brown on brown on brown, and every once in a while popping in a floating minnow in the middle of nowhere, or or a flower in a very modest pot. It is the inner world. It is our truth being spoken out into the world. Next, please. Alden Mason. I mean, I grew up with him. My parents showed his work in 1964 in Vancouver, BC. I wasn't alive yet. And I remember going to his studio as a 6-year-old down at the Northwest Lofts in Seattle, rather. So he is my whole life. He's the reason I live in Seattle. He's the reason I have the house that I have. But different from this idea that everybody gets together and learns how to paint sumi on watercolor paper. He's maybe peripheral to a Northwest school. He is from the Northwest. He's from the Skagit Valley. He knows all about living here, and he knows all about the joy of being outdoors here and how beautiful everything is. Insects, plants, dirt, color, looking into the sky. Some of the last few things we did together that were outside of Seattle was we drove up to the Skagit Valley so we could see the snow geese. And when we drove back towards Seattle, just before we left the Skagit, I told him we were going to see a rainbow because it was like today. Obviously, we're going to see a rainbow if there's going to be any sun at all. And just as I said it, it started to form, and we ended up with a full arc with this cloudy background. And then I told him, just watch, we're going to get a second. We got 3. But it is his joy. You know, you get into his car at 84, and he turns it on. It's a tiny little Chevelle thing. I don't know. It's so small, and he's 6'4", and he's cramping himself into the thing. He turns on the car, and little Richard is blaring. Like, I can't yell at him loud enough to tell him to turn it down. This kind of joy, I think, is what is represented in his pieces. And he had serious things to say. He had commentary about some of his collectors, or he had commentary about his current love. But he was falling in love all the time. And that is exactly what he was trying to share with us at any given moment. And his references are from all over. Papua New Guinea. Like, let's close this ring of fire already. Mexico. He was down there all the time. And then, of course, the Skagit Valley is his home, is his heart, and it shows up in his work.
I love the personal history with him because his work varies over time with these amazing series that are very different, and so many discussions I'm involved in are dissecting all these series of art, but having that personal history. And I just want to say, I hope Falling in Love is not peripheral to Northwest School or anything. Thanks, Phen. That was
pleasure.
wonderful.
I think we have one last one. There we go. And I think it is that both Debbi and I chose Norman Lundin to be included here. And for me, it is his quiet. It is the God in the everyday. It's the being in your studio and being completely in love with what you're doing and needing to impart that. And what I was told yesterday by Carol Clifford of Greg Kucera Gallery is that he paints from memory. So if you take that in, that is exactly what we're talking about. It is that you're completely in your own head with all of these marvelous influences from everywhere in the world, and you distill it to the essence of why we are here. Yeah.
Debbi and Phen both had Norman Lundin, but once we had narrowed yours from 97 to, I think, 43, I said, let's give... Okay, we're back to the original Big Four, and so let's open it up to a conversation now. Please feel free. Maybe we should turn the lights up a little bit, and Eli, if you'd like to come and offer the microphone to people.
I had one last question for you, Greg, which is that, with your whole kind of curatorial thesis and process here, you once mentioned the concept of the inner rings and the outer rings. And I was hoping you could share that with everyone today.
Yeah, if you think of rings on a tree or concentric circles, we all are familiar with phrases like 6 degrees of separation and that. I'm always interested in how things start and how they build out. And part of going back to the flow of the river, the different tributaries or forks we might talk about is one. The difference, the variety of art media is another. When Dolores Tarzan writes this book, published in 2002, she covered extensively a lot of artists, and I love all the personal information about them. But if you look on the back cover, there's only 3 women artists then that are really recognized in a big way. And there were more, of course, involved and recognized, but when you do a book, so the proportionality is really interesting to me and how things change over time. And maybe the change isn't that more artists emerge, it's that we begin to give them the credit that they're due, that society changes to the point. I remember I was close friends with Doris Chase in her older years, the sculptor who has the amazing piece up at Cary Park on Queen Anne Hill. And she was talking about how breaking into public art as a woman of her day and how difficult that could be and how people really thought of her as pushy in that. And I thought she was pushy. I loved it. I mean, that's what you have to do as an artist. I mean, anyone out there, if you just sit back and there are so many ways now to be visible. But why was it that it was a negative thing for a woman to want to introduce herself and to have people learn about her work and to have something to say and to add to the broader art world? So I think the concentric circles are both, changes how things do evolve over time, but really more of just putting a spotlight on maybe what's always been there. So, yes. She'll bring you the mic, just so for the recording. I think in the auditorium here, we may be able to hear each other, but for the recording, it really helps.
That concentric circle seems to stop at the 49th parallel. I saw one, or heard one reference to British Columbia, and I know that Toby was in touch with Emily Carr. So why do things stop at the border, and how, is there any potential that that will change, and we'll look at this region from a more bioregional standpoint as Cascadia rather than the Pacific Northwest, because it's actually Southwest Canada, right?
Yeah, no, I think you have a really good point, and of course, borders are artificial and imposed through various histories and things like that. We here at BIMA, our focus tends to be on the art and craft of the Puget Sound region. So what I curate, but definitely if you look at the real story out there and the broader relationships and connections, I do think, and this may be a bias I have being a former director of the Museum of Northwest Art, when we talk about this particular history and the connections that most artists had or the influences they had. And Emily Carr, I remember, I'll diverge a little bit. One of my favorite groups of artists is the group of 7, which should have been the group of 8. But of course, Emily Carr being a woman painter of her day, not included in it. But I do feel, just you mentioned the snow geese, and we all have our centers of gravity. And for me, this story, from what I know, and just all, if I were to look at the most dense connections, there is a Seattle to Bellingham, and maybe it's confined. I look at, we don't show a lot of British Columbian artists in galleries here. I mean, I don't know if it's getting work over the border or, what it is, but there is this, dividing line, so to speak. But I think I'm looking at concentric circles that are not as broad as your in a very valid way pointing to. And anyone have comments, questions? What do you think? Is it all bunk? Is it? Okay. And this is David Eisenhower, the artist mentioned in the video we played. From Port Hadlock over on the Port Townsend part of our world, and of course not excluding that area.
Yes, the new cultural center over there.
Yeah.
Yes. Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I can't help but say something about a couple of the artists that have been up on the screen. Ann Morse was one of them because she's a good friend, and I'm kind of lamenting actually not having seen her for about 4 or 5 years now, and I really need to get back out to Lummi Island and visit. My wife and I have visited her 7 or 8 times out there, and she cast her work at River Dog Foundry for, I don't know, the entire time that I was there. I started at River Dog in '92, and I just remember first working on one of her sculptures before I met her. That was just like this enormous piece, the Minotaur with her sitting on the nose of the Minotaur. There's just an enormous amount of tension in this piece, and thinking this woman must just have an enormous stature. And then I met her, and she's like 4'9", but she did have an enormous stature anyways. Just like her personality was just overflowing with enthusiasm. And she would come to the foundry, and she was just a joy to work with. She was never harsh about anything, but she was an absolute stickler for the way things needed to be. And I think that, looking at her work and talking to her about it over the years, like she had a piece called She of the Piece, and it was this big vessel, and it was her in it, nude, with like water buffalo horns on her head. So there was this juxtaposition of the male and the female in a vessel. And I asked her about it, and she just said, well, what does it mean to you? And I said, well, I told her, I said, it's a vessel, and of course you can take that in a billion different directions. And then here you are, obviously saying that we're all both male and female. And she said, yeah, that's some of it. And after the whole conversation, I just kind of felt like I could look at her work and a lot of other work differently and realize that you don't have to have an exact meaning to it. And I think then Phil McCracken, his work was the same way. I worked on his work for many years at Riverdog, and then for a while I was the one that he would trust to finish his work off there. And he would come in and look at a piece of work, and there would be a little area that I worked the texture in that he didn't like. And it would just be this little tiny area, and I couldn't see it, what was wrong with it, and then he'd say, look at it from this angle over here. And I did. And then I saw that. And so he taught, he was a big influence in his lyrical work and just the way he expressed the natural world with this vibrancy and this beauty and this strangeness that sometimes you couldn't quite understand exactly what it was. So anyways, that's what I got, I guess, about the whole thing. I'm thrilled to be part of this show. And yes, I think there's a Northwest School. And I think there was a Northwest School, there is a Northwest School, and you don't have to be here, but you do have to be immersed in this place in some way to understand it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question about how you feel about the health of the arts community. There have been a number of galleries closing and Bellevue Arts Museum's closing, and prices are high for artists. Like, have you noticed how this has affected the arts community over time? Does it feel like it's a optimistic, vibrant community? Do you feel like there's a lot of pressure on individuals to be able to continue making work? Like, I'm just curious, you've seen it over a long time. Yeah.
Pressure on individuals to make work?
Well, just like, how do you, it's expensive to live here. How do you keep making your work and, live your life? It was a lot cheaper earlier. Like, if you've just noticed how, the effects on artists.
Yes. And then, isn't it always thus?
Yeah.
Isn't it always true that people who are compelled to make are often struggling? It's not usual that they have a big nest egg sitting under them that compels them to make. There are a few people who are well-funded because they've waited to their encore career, or they were lucky drawing the straws when they were born. But I think they are compelled. And it isn't a matter of being asked to. They have something they want to impart, and it is the study that, takes over the everyday. Maybe he, the young man at Winston Wachter, I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name, Barry Johnson, put it on and fake it till you make it kind of guy. But on the other hand, when young artists come up to me and want to know, well, how come you can't show my work? Well, how many pieces have you made? Oh, well, I've got 2. Where do I start? But I have been following my father's example, and as a 90-year-old man who came to visit me in May, he came from China a few days before arriving to Vancouver, BC, and he came down to Seattle not to visit me, but to visit some young ladies who were showing at Gallery 110. And by the way, I'm staying at your house tonight. Okay. But it was really super charming because he is in his early 90s. He was coming from China and he had some, doctor's appointments and whatnot. But the reason for coming down to Seattle is a friend of his has a daughter who went to school in the United States and happened to have some work showing at Gallery 110. So it was a gallery show about 5 young Asian women who went to school in the United States for fine arts studies in studio. And they happened to know one of the young ladies. Oh, sorry, it's not Gallery 110. Oh, it's Soil. Anyway, pardon me. Neighbor up the street, love them. And what he had to say to these young ladies who are ambitious, really want to embark on their career to have something to say, but don't yet quite have something to say, was that he had compliments for a few things that they were exhibiting, but they were trying to say too much, and that what they really needed to do was study until they could recite to you the history of contemporary art for the past 150 years. And it wasn't even necessarily that they could tell you the names of these people or the time that it was made, although, duh. But it's hard to say that to a 24-year-old girl, right? But the point is that they absorb it so much that it is part of the vocabulary. They don't have to think about it. If anything, there might be this disappointment that perfect form didn't just flow right out of their body, but that's what the practice is for. That is why people are obsessed in making 10 to 14 hours a day, and then they're doing it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they're exhausted, but they gotta get it out. Or they got to get it perfect so they can really tell you that beautiful thing that has been obsessing them or the interaction that they've been having with that material. So he said, this is nice. You've made this little house form and you've got these oranges and you've got 6 different colors and you've got 700 ideas. Just tell me one thing. Don't paint me a bowl with 3 oranges. Cézanne did that great. Don't do that. Tell me something new that you're in love with about those 3 oranges. Paint me a big orange. Paint me the quarter of an orange over here. And the suggestion of an arc over there. I don't need to see all 3 oranges. But show me why, right? And that's, I think, what drives an artist, which drives an art scene. And while not everybody understands that there's a value in this, there's enough of us that can show others the magic, the reason for being, the reason why you can stop for a moment and hear what is resonating for all of us, And we might not be able to do it all at once, but there are moments of beauty no matter where you are. You're in the elevator up the Muni Tower. There's only one other person in the municipal tower and something beautiful happens. Who are you going to share it with? The only person you can share it with is a stranger in the elevator. So yes, please. Please share it. Because why else are we here? Why get up at 6 a.m? Why have the same dinner every night? We're here because it's beautiful. Let's celebrate. And so, yes, it is tough to be an artist. Yes, materials are skyrocketing. We're doing what we can to create opportunities for those who have something to say. but they're going to find a way.
Yeah.
They're going to find the driftwood and that rock and break that rock and maybe grind it down into pigment. Like it could be mud on mud on mud, which our Northwest School is, branching from. Because the browns on browns on browns with a little bit of white is not really what those 4 guys were about most of the time, right? But they were making because they had to. So does that answer?
Yeah, I love that. And I think of the wasps. The sculptural
Yeah,
wasp
the
nest.
Julianne Mann's work, which is phenomenal and probably using the most simple, ready, accessible materials. Sonia, I think part of I think what you're also getting at, Wendy, is what I call the arts ecosystem, and I think that there is so much need to expand the shared and collaborative resources. Like on Bainbridge Island, when Barn announced it was going to happen and become another studio resource that artists could go to, they could take classes. You didn't have to have all of that equipment at home. Pratt Fine Arts Center, I'm a former director of. It's those kinds of places that really need support. You've mentioned Soil, Gallery 110. I think of, Method Gallery, lots of spaces that have been where artists have found ways to create, not everyone can have a commercial gallery and deal with the realities, the economic realities there. And so if you do the math, like I think of, we talked about the hundreds of artists that could have been in this one show. I spend most of my time having to say no to artists and their ideas because the mathematical reality of how many slots of time do you have to show, how many galleries do you have, how many pieces of work do you really want to accept into a permanent art collection? Because the larger that gets, the more that won't be shown, whereas we here love to rotate things over and over again. So there's just a lot of economic pressures. But the more that we can all support resources, whether they're educational or studio or gallery, that can support artists at large. Anne Gould-Hauberg used to say, she was a great mentor of mine, and one of the founders of Pilchuck Glass School with Dale Chihuly and her then husband John. She used to say, if we don't support our artists, we won't have them. So, go to the galleries and, put a red dot on something if you can, and help support a scholarship. Or sitting in this room, I have loyal volunteers who are also donors and that might be able to say yes to that book project we're doing. Everything that can support an artist in any kind of way is really critical right now, and it is hard. Is it harder? I don't have a personal experience with real estate. Is certainly more expensive. I think it's harder to move here. We have to some degree an aging visual arts population on Bainbridge Island, because unlike the 1970s and 80s and maybe even the 90s, people could move here and raise a family and have a studio. We're not seeing a lot of that with a younger population. So anyway,
To answer your question, yes, it has changed, and yes, it is more expensive. When I first came here in the 80s, it was a very vibrant scene because of all of the warehouse spaces and studio spaces in Belltown, the 619 building, and then that crush of having tech come, and then suddenly a third floor walk up, you can't afford it as a artist. I do see hope. For instance, the Good Building that Jane Richowski, again, it's so fun. I see these names only in print, and I don't actually verbally say them.
Richlovsky.
Richlowski, thank you.
You're welcome. And Good Arts Building.
So Jane and the individual who owns Cherry Street and then a theater person, they got together and bought that building. And so that's a new kind of studio space that is affordable. And
And you know, to a large degree, artist owned. I mean, you're not,
Yes.
you know, paying rent is such a difficult thing. We look at Bainbridge Arts and Crafts right here in Winslow, who has 76 years of service. There's got to be other models than just being in the commercial rental world, because that is what's definitely changing.
But isn't it also a matter of what we ask people to demand? That our kids are taught art, that they are allowed to express themselves, and that it is a really important aspect of being?
It is, and okay, I'm prompted. I'm going to have to do this. This is the little funnel spiel. Okay, some of you have heard this, but the museum world, you know, there's a great academic history, and so many museums are preserving, conserving things like mummies and different things that are not what BIMA really has to worry about. But I love this job, and I love this art museum, partly because I feel like instead of being up in an ivory tower, I talk about, you know, the ivory tower with the barbed wire fence and the machine guns and the moat around it, so you know, you can barely, you know, struggle to get up and have a conversation with the museum. I've always felt that we're in more of a position of being like a funnel, where we're at the bottom of the funnel, and it's the investments of everyone. You know, I can't accept a work into the permanent art collection, or I can't look at possibly hundreds of artists that could qualify for a show unless there was that encouraging family, maybe that high school art teacher. One day when they had gotten to a point, Phen says, yes, please, let's have this conversation. Let's show the world what you're doing. Without the investments of people, and believe me, I worked with Bill Traver to help start his Tacoma Gallery. And the reality, if you want to talk about changing economics and cash flows and different things you have to pencil out to make it work, the gallery world is not, you know, such an easy ride all the time. But if you think about the arts centers, that person who wrote that check to support a scholarship that would help someone for the first time get to that second step, maybe in college or a community place like Pratt or Barn, the person who has devoted themselves to having the art supply store, or maybe you know, can you imagine someone, it could never really exist, but could publish an amazing regional magazine faithfully, with possibly some cash flow issues once in a while, for 32 years. But BIMA, I'm sitting here and I'm on the receiving end as a chief curator of the investments of everybody going into it, the artists, their dreams, their vision, their determination. And so, you know, I think there's so much. And Wendy, to your point, yes, it's harder, but look at all the pieces that are still alive and working. And if we can just keep an eye on those and in our own ways pick a few to support, then I get this amazing mathematical problem that I can't solve. But thank you all for what you do, whether you're artists or collectors or volunteers or donors or whatever it is. And many of you in here, I know, wear many hats. So thanks.
You're making me think in terms of, again, your question is still buzzing in my head. Artists end up moving to places that they can afford to live. So look at Bo Edison, look at Mount Vernon, look at Tacoma. There are lots of those kind of places that are forming. So yes.
We are running overtime, and I'm getting a little thirsty. And but just wondering if there's one last question or comment. We will stay open past 5, so don't worry about that. We do have a reception upstairs. Please join us. It'll take a few minutes. I wanted the staff and volunteers to be here, so it'll take just a few minutes. Maybe we do bathroom breaks and wind your way. There's lots of other things to see in the building. And Jenna, thanks for putting this together and for what you're doing and the part of all these other facets of BIMA and what you bring to it. Thank you very much for all you do, both of you. And I guess we'll close on that. Is there one more question, comment?
Another comment? I got one. I want to say thank you to BIMA. I think it is. I look back at Cameron Snow and I think about how you began doing the videos here, and the fact that BIMA is documenting, to have videos that, like Greg, that promote the shows, and to document through catalogs. And this is like so important. So thank you. Oh yeah, it's
Yeah,
great. So thank you so much.
BIMA has a great YouTube channel with many different kinds of videos. It starts during COVID. Kristen Tollefson, our education director, we shut down like everyone had to, but we didn't want to stop. And Sheila Hughes, our executive director, was not about to lay anybody off. We didn't know how long this would be. How do you get staff back? Anything like that. We were lucky because we held on and we did get those PPE or whatever, the loans, what were called loans. That out of that, Hunter Stroud, who ran AV, says, "Oh well, I went to film school. Maybe we could do something." And fast forward, Valerie Peterman's here doing digital programs. Sheila Hughes has been very successful with a relationship with the Murdoch Foundation and other PRISM programs and other funders. And we actually have a formal video. I talk about what it takes. It takes resources to do these, and we're lucky, and we're so grateful that we can be in this game this way. So,
Don't you make your own luck, though, Greg?
my own what?
I think you've made your own luck, though,
Well,
because what you've done is you've represented the community, the greater community. From Bainbridge, you actually show what we are talking about. You're not just carting in shows from far, far away. You're bringing it in so that the rest of us can appreciate it. Thank you.
Everything here is done from scratch. I mean, not just what I curate, but everything we do, and that's really, really fun. And so, anyway, I think I'm even now a little more thirsty. So.